Hello my friends and welcome back to the channel. It is Friday and whatever you're doing, you're going to have a great weekend. Only good vibes on this channel. Let's check out what's happening in Ukraine, and in this video I'm going to go through Valerii Zaluzhnyi, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, his analysis of what went wrong with the counteroffensive which started in the summer. Now, a commander-in-chief taking responsibility for the mistakes and suggesting what we could do better is what I expect from a person who is in charge of an entire army in war. In my eyes, Zaluzhnyi gets points for this, but right now let's read what he wrote and I'll read you the summary. General Zaluzhnyi admits that he made a mistake in assessing the situation at the beginning of the year, assuming that Russia would not be able to sustain such a large number of lost soldiers. Now, the first sentence already is so much more than any Russian commander would ever do. Admits that he made a mistake. Taking responsibility and moving on and trying to improve the situation. In Russia, admitting that you made a mistake is to admit to being thrown out of the window. There is no taking responsibility in Russia, and this is what I like about the armed forces of Ukraine. People stand by their actions and their mistakes. Russia would not be able to sustain such a large number of lost soldiers as happened in the first year of the war for an extended period. He acknowledged that he placed too much hope in the draining effect of the attrition battles on the Russian army and leadership. The Ukrainian commander-in-chief also made it quite clear that a mistake was made in planning the offensive using war materials obtained from donors according to their own standards without having the entire force armed and trained according to those standards. I've talked about this a lot. Ukraine has been giving NATO weaponry, Western weaponry, and they're expected to fight according to NATO standards, which usually on the battlefield requires air superiority and artillery superiority, both of which Ukraine did not have at the beginning of the counteroffensive in the summer 2023. This means Ukrainians from the get-go could not fight according to NATO standards, because without air superiority, if you move your tanks like any NATO force would, they would get bombarded from the air and by enemy artillery, which has not been suppressed because there's not enough artillery shells or artillery pieces. He emphasizes again that without air superiority, it is not possible to organize major offensive operations, as Ukraine is not prepared to endure the losses that the Russian army has suffered near Avdiivka in the past 4 weeks. The planned offensive had to be halted, a new approach had to be devised. Many people view this halt in offensive operations by Ukraine as a failure of the counteroffensive. How I view it is a bit different. In my eyes, in any kind of military force, one of the most important value is improvise, adapt, overcome. You have all heard it. In the Russian army, it is not improvise, adapt, overcome. It is achieve the goal with whatever means necessary, taking whatever losses necessary. Ukrainian army cannot fight like that because they have to minimize their losses. Now, if their first offense with the Leopard tanks in the summer failed, Ukrainians took a step back and started again to attrition the Russian army, attacking their vital supply lines, destroying logistics, and hunting artillery pieces to minimize Russian artillery superiority, minimizing Ukrainian own losses. In my eyes, this is adaptation and improvising in the best way possible. So in my eyes, I don't see this counteroffensive as a failure, but as a lesson to do things differently in the future. And also, I do agree that Ukrainian forces somewhat underestimated the Russian defenses, which had been built up for 6 months. Let me know what you think about General Zaluzhnyi's acceptance of his mistake. Let me know if you think he should continue as the leader of the armed forces of Ukraine, and let me know what you think about my analysis of the situation. This essay that he wrote is very eye-opening, and I stand by him still, even though he admitted to his mistakes. Because in my eyes, this is a very good value of a man. If he is ready to admit to his mistakes, it means he can change and is willing to do so. But now, my friends, we'll zoom into Avdiivka, where Russians have commenced another offensive convoy to the city. The 47th Ukrainian Brigade stood against them and they released a video of how it looked. Let's look at the drone footage and let's see what really went on. Early morning or evening, as you can see. I would say this is morning because you can still see the fog, which usually is over any Ukrainian field in the morning. And Boom! Here's the Russian convoy, same old tactics. This is what I was just talking about, Zaluzhnyi. These tactics, Ukrainian used the same ones on the counteroffensive in the summer with armored convoys with Western tanks, and it failed and they stopped using it. Russian army, on the other hand, has been using these same tactics for 2 years now, and obviously they fail and they carry huge losses, but they don't adapt or improvise or change it. They will carry on with it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 armored vehicles, most of them BTRs, and we see 1 tank with a cope cage. Let's see how they're doing. Oh, even another BTR in the front here and another one. We have 12 armored vehicles bunched together in one convoy, forcing a minefield under Ukrainian artillery fire, being annihilated by the 47th Brigade. Kamikaze drones were deployed. I cannot show you the rest of it, but I can tell you what happened. Artillery missions annihilated the first and the last trucks. Kamikazes picked up the middle ones. Infantry dismounted and were hunted by smaller drones. One by one, this attack failed. They will try again tomorrow, you can be sure of that. My friends, look at this photo. This is an A-10 Warthog, and I always think about this because I remember 3-4 years ago when I was reacting to United States military capabilities, I made a separate video on A-10 Warthog. The machine gun sound, everybody knows it. I would only imagine what would one of these planes do to this entire convoy. I'd love to see it. Putin did something bad. Well, what a surprise, but this one is really horrible because he pulled Russia out of the nuclear test ban treaty signed in 1996. He officially ratified it, and now officially Russia as a country is out, meaning they will again or can again start nuclear testing if they want to. Very bad news. It is a multilateral treaty to ban nuclear weapon test explosions and any other nuclear explosions for both civilian and military purposes in all environments. I have a very brief video for you explaining it detailedly. Let's watch it together.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has signed a law withdrawing Russia's ratification of the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, the global treaty banning nuclear weapons tests. The move is condemned by the organization that promotes adherence to the landmark Arms Control Pact. Though expected, it's a sign of a deep chill between the U.S. and Russia. Moscow says the aim is to restore parity with the United States, which has signed but never ratified the treaty. But experts worry this walkback could be a sign Russia is ramping up towards a test. The CTBT was formed in 1996 and bans nuclear weapon test explosions or any other nuclear explosions. The goal? To reduce and eliminate the development of nuclear arms. 187 states have signed the treaty, with 178 passing corresponding laws in their parliament. Of the 9 countries that possess nuclear weapons, Britain, France, and Russia have signed and ratified the agreement. The US, Israel, and China have signed but not ratified, with India, Pakistan, and North Korea yet to do either. The treaty can only legally come into force once 44 named countries which possess nuclear weapons or have nuclear power and research reactors have signed and ratified.
That's an interesting fact, actually, that 44 countries in the world have nuclear weapons or nuclear reactors for energy for civilian usage. I mean, what is it? 7 countries only have nuclear weapons and the rest of them have nuclear reactors.
It has created a de facto norm against nuclear testing. Putin has stated the decision to withdraw its ratification is to mirror the current status of the CTBT in the United States. It's another move that heightens tensions between the countries since the start of the Ukraine war. Moscow suspended its last remaining nuclear arms treaty with the U.S. in February, and Putin has moved tactical nuclear missiles to Belarus on Ukraine's border.
This is a true return to the Cold War era. We had a pause from the 90s after the fall of the Soviet Union up until, I would say, 2022, 24th of February, when the new phase of the Cold War began truly, in earnest, because Russia is now back testing nuclear weapons. Hot war is going on the Eurasian continent, and proxy wars are being fought between the United States and the Western powers, and let's call it the axis then, which is Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. In my eyes, this is Cold War, again, continuing.
No country, except North Korea, has tested a nuclear weapon since the 1990s. The move to pull away from the CTBT gives Russia legal cover to test if it wanted to. But it says it is not a statement of intent and that it won't test unless the U.S. does. It has also committed to continue supplying data to the global monitoring system, which alerts the world to any nuclear test.
Here I have to pause because about 1.5 months ago, Russia and India had this kind of competition. Who will land on the moon first? Not a man, but a moon lander. And Russia actually was first to launch. They launched 1 week before Indians did. And what was the outcome? Well, it was a magnificent crash on the moon. Yeah, it failed. It exploded on the moon. And then Indians landed successfully. It was a huge setback for Putin personally, because growing up, it's a known fact, he was a huge fan of the Soviet space program, like every Soviet kid was at the time. Astronauts in the Soviet Union were true superstars, like in the West. And Putin personally wanted to be connected to again reviving the Russian space program by landing on the moon. But it magnificently failed. So I'm not sure how safe this Russian nuclear testing will be if they couldn't pull off the moon landing mission. Not sure about the nuclear testing then. My friends, another Russian Su-25 was shot down in Ukraine. Recently we've been seeing increase in the Russian Su-25 shot down. I'm not even saying aviation losses, I'm saying specifically Su-25s, because this is the plane Russia is most willing to sacrifice over Ukraine, because it is old and they have a lot of those. And they're not being maintained, so they will fall out of the sky anyway, so why not fall down in Ukraine? The commander of the Tavria group of forces, Alexander Tarnavsky, confirmed another Russian Su-25 was shot down. Now, my friends, we'll go to the second front, and I mean the Dnipro-Kherson front, if I say this. I would divide Ukraine right now into two fronts, because the most active front, of course, is Avdiivka, northern and southern Ukraine, and the second front, which is less active, but which Ukraine is opening again, is the Dnipro River front, where they are enlarging their bridgeheads. Let's go to Antonovsky Bridge, which is right here, a little bit to the east of it. We see this Vorozhonye Lake, sorry for the name pronunciation, and this here is Koinka River. Let's zoom into it. Why do I do it? Because we have magnificent footage from the Ukrainians. Let's watch it. This is the very same river, and we can see a kamikaze drone. Yes, and this is the very same kamikaze drone that we are actually going to give Ukrainian Special Forces in November. I'll be in Ukraine in 3 weeks, giving Ukrainian Special Forces 30 drones that you bought. You donated 60,000 euros in my previous fundraiser, and half of these funds will be used to buy a drone, half of the funds will be used to buy a truck. The drone is flying, searching for a Russian ship on a routine patrol mission, and boom, it found one, found the target. This is a Russian scouting ship. What is going to happen to it? You don't have to guess for long. Here is another footage, another drone looking at the situation. I cannot show you more, but kaboom! These Russians on this rubber scouting boat wanted to have a cigarette. They had a cigarette, and what followed was a magnificent explosion. Now, my friends, we'll go back to eastern Ukraine and I'll zoom into the city of Donetsk, right south from Avdiivka, and actually the Vokzal, not the Vokzal, but the train station for logistics. These are the railway tracks. And this is where Russia gets most of their fuel for the Avdiivka offensive. Huge fuel trains come in, unload their fuel. The fuel is transported to the front, which is only 2 kilometers away, right here. And then they push these armored convoys into Avdiivka with the very same fuel brought into Donetsk. Ukrainians didn't like that, because it's not a good feeling when Russians are sending armored convoys to your locations every day. What did they do? 3 days ago, they struck a Russian fuel train. Magnificent explosion. The entire train was in flames. It looked like Hollywood. And here we have new photos published about the burning of the train. All of these carts are burned empty. They contain a lot of fuel and they burn slowly to like they burn all the way. You can see the burn marks. It's all full black. How much does an entire train loaded with fuel cost? I don't know. Maybe you do. Put it in the comments and educate me. But this is what was lost for the Russians. And now, my friends, to give you an even more thorough analysis of the counteroffensive, we can now say it has concluded with mixed results and Zaluzhnyi has admitted to mistakes that the armed forces of Ukraine took, gaining points in my eyes, but I want to give you an even more thorough analysis of it. And for this I have chosen Ewan McDonald, Twitter user. You can see it right here, it's his analysis, and I think it summarizes it perfectly, giving different angles to everything. I rarely make predictions as the future is uncertain and the end is always near, but declarations that Ukrainian offensive has culminated may be premature. Ukrainian gains continue to be incremental, but the level of fighting has not significantly changed for months. While gains on the ground certainly haven't matched declared goals, the counteroffensive can't really be considered to have culminated until there is a sharp drop-off in the fighting that hasn't yet been observed. Well, yes, we'll look at the Russian losses after this thread, and the losses are insanely high, meaning Russians are on the offense, meaning they're losing a lot. Fighting is still very active. Indeed, Ukraine may have actually opened another front on the left eastern bank of the Dnipro in Kherson Oblast. It is not impossible that the long-awaited breakthrough might come here, and I do agree with it. We might see something happening in Kherson that nobody is ready for. Definitely not the Russians, because I know what the Russians have deployed in the area. It's not great. It's mostly territorial defense forces. Meanwhile, Russia presses reserves into battle not only in Avdiivka but in Vuhledar, wasting insane amounts of equipment and numbers of soldiers on fruitless meat assaults, seemingly launched for political purposes. These attacks weakened Russian military for no gain. In the early days of the Ukrainian counteroffensive, it quickly became apparent that a rapid breakthrough of the Russian defenses was not going to happen. I was really bummed out about it. I saw all of the footage of destroyed Leopard tanks, and my first thought was, this doesn't work, don't do it. And I was very glad to see Ukrainians actually adapting to the situation, seeing the failure and changing the tactics. They didn't do it anymore. The convoys stopped, armored convoys of Leopard tanks. Not only had promised Western equipment failed to arrive, Ukrainian command structures capable of executing NATO-style combined arms maneuvering warfare simply did not exist. There was little coordination above the battalion level. And this is a very good paragraph because any kind of coordination between military units requires top-notch communications. I know this because I was company communications. And for armies, it shows how capable they are if you see how capable is their communication, especially with bigger units like brigades. Brigade-level communication and cooperation on the battlefield is insanely difficult, and nobody is better at this in the world than the United States. For armies like Russia or Ukraine, the biggest problem is the communication with the Air Force, with artillery, and with bigger units cooperating with each other on the battlefield. It required specialized departments of people whose only goal is to force this communication. Ukraine and Russia both have a lot to learn on that, Russia more of course. Russian communication is not ever over company level. Ukrainians can do well on battalion level, but not on brigade level. United States can work with divisions, hell, entire armies. When Ukraine tried a limited rapid breakthrough, it was defeated. And the images of this small attempted attack were endlessly recycled by Russian propaganda to bolster early claims that Ukraine's counteroffensive had failed. Ukraine reverted to the style of warfare it knew best, company, even platoon-level attacks on limited targets. Successful gains were measured in meters rather than kilometers. After pressing in 3 directions in the south, the number of active fronts fell to 1. Robotina. Again, a very good paragraph because we saw, you remember what happened in the Kharkiv front in 2022? A very successful liberation of the Kharkiv Oblast and Izium, where about 400 Russian armor pieces fell to Ukrainian trophies. What Ukraine did there was exactly what we described here. Company-level assaults, extremely fast, small group assaults, Russian positions, dismounts 100 meters before, shock and awe, jumps into the trenches, and it worked marvelously. They tried to do the same thing in the summer of 2023, and it failed marvelously. Russian defensives were too strong and too built up, the minefields were endless, and the artillery positions shot in, plus the Russians had air superiority in this area. Of course, if something works, you try to do it again, and if it doesn't work, if you're smart, you will stop doing that. That's what the Ukrainians did. They couldn't repeat the Izium liberation tactics. The initial yardstick to measure the successes of the counteroffensive were no longer relevant. So it could be said that the offensive failed in early June, but nevertheless it continued with new ways to gauge the success. And I do agree, we cannot look at Ukrainian success of the counteroffensive by ground liberated. We have to look at it now by Russian offensive capabilities destroyed. And by that measure, it is success. It became a war of attrition, with the Ukrainian military, by all believable accounts, becoming one of the rare militaries to suffer fewer casualties on offense than in defense. But Russia's well-prepared defenses, they were given months to prepare while the West dithered over whether to give Ukraine tanks, meant that Ukraine's gains on the ground could only be minimal. I do agree that the Ukrainian counteroffensive outcome is very directly connected to Western ability to support Ukraine with weapons, with artillery shells, with electronic warfare systems, anti-air defense systems, planes, for example. The West was very slow to send weapons to which Ukraine needs the most, which is ATACMS, Taurus missiles, which have still not been sent by Germany. Ukraine also desperately needed long-range ATACMS at the start of this offensive, but these were not to come for months. Delays by the West in supplying these weapons cost Ukrainian lives and Ukrainian success on the battlefield. I do agree. I think if Ukraine would have had, let's say, 300 ATACMS at the beginning of the counteroffensive in summer 2023, the outcome would have been drastically different. The attacks with the ATACMS, officially used by Ukraine for the first time on October 17th, have caused Russia to redeploy its frontline aviation attack helicopters further to the rear, 150 kilometers away to be precise, because that's the range of the ATACMS supplied to Ukraine by the United States. The version of the weapon given to Ukraine by the US is also useful in attacking supply depots. Had a longer range version been given, and in decent numbers, only about 20 ATACMS have thus far been acknowledged to have been supplied. And with these 20 ATACMS already on October 17th, Ukraine was able to knock out cold 9 Russian choppers in Berdyansk airfield. They were bunched together by naive Russian commanders thinking that Ukrainians couldn't reach them. This shows that the United States' capabilities used in Ukrainian war yield maximum results if the US decides to send them. Ukraine could have already been threatening Russian supply deposits and lines across the south and east of the country. Still, Ukraine has had successes not only on dry land but at sea. Over the summer, it liberated some oil rigs. We're talking about the Boyko oil rig towers. And I remember the video of the Special Forces boats, 3 boats, driving onto it, manning the oil rig and liberating it. And then a Russian fighter jet came and they were able to shoot at it from a boat, damaging it enough for the Russian fighter to have to leave the battlefield. That was an insane video. Denying the Russians bases of reconnaissance over the entire western Black Sea area. This not only allowed Ukraine to reopen its grain corridor of agricultural exports, it also gave Ukrainian special ops troops a platform from which to launch commando raids on the coast of Ukraine's Russian-occupied Crimea. The Russian military blogger Rehi has repeatedly reported on Ukrainian raids. Ukrainian special forces landing on Crimea, hit and run and go back. This is possible because of the liberation of the Boyko oil rig towers. These raids don't liberate any new land, but they do something more important right now. The raids had a purpose, not only of harassing Russian occupation forces in Ukrainian Crimea, but in destroying Russian air defenses in the Russian-occupied Crimea. Air defenses are very expensive and Russia cannot produce them right now. Any taken out air defense is a huge loss, and this is what these fast hit-and-run raids by the special forces are achieving in Crimea. Sowing chaos. Russia has to keep a certain number of troops deployed in Crimea. That means they're away from Russian-occupied mainland Ukraine. With the Russian air defenses destroyed, Ukraine was able to launch missile attacks, first on landing ships and submarines in Sevastopol on September 12th and 13th. Russia lost 1 landing ship and 1 submarine. They joined Moscow underwater. This was done because of the liberation of the Boyko oil rig towers, which enabled Ukrainian special forces to take out their defenses in Crimea, which enabled Ukraine to attack these ships. It's all connected. And then on Black Sea Fleet headquarters building in Sevastopol on September 22, where the Black Sea commander itself got injured. These attacks have effectively caused the Russian Black Sea Fleet to redeploy to Novorossiysk in Russian proper. Ukraine, a country famously without a navy, has defeated a fleet of a supposed superpower and forced it to retreat. That's a counteroffensive success, and I do agree and see it like that. Back to the predictions. Ukraine's offensive will not culminate in the way military analysts commonly understand it. It will settle into low-level fighting again, with Ukraine continuing to press for several months, attritioning Russian forces and looking for chances of a breakthrough. This will result in more Ukrainian combat casualties, attritioning the country's ability to resist Russian invasion. If Ukraine is to defeat Russia, it must defeat Russia quickly. A long war favors the Kremlin. Now, an excellent thread by Ewan MacDonald. You can see him right on the screen. You can go and follow him on Twitter. And I do agree with the last paragraph that a quick war is a way to win over Russia in Ukraine, and the West has the capability to make that happen, but it needs to be a political choice. And since the West is a democracy, it needs to be a choice of the Western people. And this choice comes at the expense of the Western economies, because the economies are already struggling and the money needs to be forwarded to the military production, which takes it away from other facets of the economy. But this is what we need to do, because if Ukraine loses, the West will lose. Now, my friends, I present to you Russian losses of the past 24 hours, 3rd of October 2023. 850 KIAs, 24 tanks and 24 armored personnel vehicles, 36 artillery systems. All of these losses reflect exactly what we were just talking about, how Ukrainians have changed their tactics by attritioning the Russian forces, by focusing on heavy defense and letting the Russians run themselves bloody on a steel wall. 2 special equipment, 33 vehicles and fuel tanks. Very high losses. My friends, after this video, after I shoot this, I have been invited to the United States ambassador to Estonia, to his residence, to have a coffee with other military bloggers from the Baltics and from Finland, and to talk about the security situation in Estonia, the Baltics, the Nordics, and in Ukraine. I will make a photo with the United States ambassador to Estonia. I'll post it on my Instagram. So if you don't follow me yet, the link is in the description below. Go and follow me and keep an eye on what I do, because these things are directly connected to helping Ukraine always. I'll see you in my Instagram. And now, my friends, my favorite part of the video, which is butchering the Patreon names. And I'll read tier 10 and above Patreons with my Estonian pronunciation. Matt Nilander, Peter Mikke, Mikke Krovlei, Keit Vandepitte, Ivar Skappel. Thank you to these people. They have affected my life directly to the better way. If you want to help also, check out my Patreon in the description below. And until my next video, my friends, which will be on Monday, so be back. Slava Ukraini, and bye-bye.